It brings me beautifully to my first slide. So can you see that? Everyone can see that slide, right? Good. Okay, so I'm Andy Jones. So basically, I run the UK and European side of, well, everything's sort of this side of the world. We have a software company called Tracker. It started back in sort of 2012, and me and my co-founder basically built the tool, and then we set up a US office in 2015, and he went over to set up the US office. Both grew up together. I started building this software actually for his business. He had a legal recruitment firm in London, and the word spread, and everybody started using the software, and we actually got to a point where we thought we would build and take it to market. And the rest is sort of history. So we now have a number of like 1,000 clients across 44 countries. We're based out of the UK as well as San Diego in California. So I very much got the short straw on that one. But the UK office is primarily based here at Haywood House, although we have remote workers now from Manchester down to Brighton. And in the US, I think we've got staff in about 8 or 9 different states. So a lot more remote working, and that's probably one of the key themes that will run through this presentation. So we provide pretty much software for the recruiting space. So for those of you who don't know what SaaS is, that's software as a service. So this is essentially software delivered primarily over the web. So via an app, via a smartphone, an iPad, and so on, but usually via the web. Which means that there's no installation required on your physical PC. So where you would install Outlook and Word and those sorts of applications, SaaS is very much internet-based. So everything is typically through the browser, which means that people can log onto that instantly from wherever they are in the world, as long as they have an internet connection. But it also means that from our side, we can enhance those products, react to the market, and then deploy that centrally, and then everybody realizes the true value of that enhancement immediately. Okay, so that's software as a service. So essentially, we provide this software to a number of different types of recruiting firm, everything from executive search, which is headhunting, typically board level type headhunting, all the way through your traditional agencies, which are the ones that you guys will typically have been involved in if you've done any recruitment, all the way down to the temps, the cleaners, and the light industrial staff that work mornings and nights, and so on and so on. Okay, so we kind of support the whole gambit when it comes to the recruiting side. Okay, so from a presentation point of view, we're basically just going to look at what happened with COVID. We're going to cover sort of the main, if you like, the timeline of this. So the initial impact of COVID and what that had on the industry. How companies adapted in a short term, the longer term effects of COVID on the recruitment industry specifically, where that recovery sits and how that recovery looks, and then really where we go from now. So the future of recruitment and how technology and companies like Tracker are basically helping that sector to recover and deal with essentially the issues around a pandemic. Okay, so the initial impact of COVID. So the 5 years to 2020, so pre-pandemic, we saw the UK recruitment sector steadily growing year on year. So 2019, the market was valued at about 39 billion, despite an awful lot of uncertainty at the time around Brexit. And the main impact of that could be seen by the fact that we had the lowest unemployment level since the 1970s. So the recruitment sector as a whole was growing steadily up until Boris basically told us that we must all stay at home, and that had a huge impact on everything recruitment. So the March and April of 2020 saw a record-breaking number of unemployment claims. We had around 1,000% increase in the claims for universal credit. And the projected increase in unemployment at that point was that it was going to hit double digits. No, it didn't. It sort of hit about 6.6, but it had a huge impact almost immediately. And although COVID has impacted the world economy, many great initiatives then came into play. So there's the 70 billion job retention scheme, or furlough as we probably know it now. That was basically the impact, was that there was the steepest decline that we'd seen in recruitment overall since 2009. So the economic crash in 2009, and really the furlough schemes are all about trying to, how do we buffer that and make sure that we don't drop back into what was a significant depression. The obvious reality, as most of you will know, is that the leisure and the hospitality sectors were hit the hardest, with the lockdown measures closing many of those businesses, and really they were unable to continue to deliver any of their services. And the suggestion is that around 46% of employees in the leisure and the hospitality industry were furloughed. And that took the number in total up to about 11. I think the record was 11.6 million people were furloughed as a result of the COVID and the job retention scheme. So while many of the leisure and hospitalities sector and businesses led the way in terms of the jobs at risk, the other big ones were around sort of transportation, mining, and the consumer focused stuff. So retail, so a lot of the shops shut, and even recruitment itself, because there was a massive drop off in the number of people that either needed jobs or had jobs, and that obviously put the recruitment sector itself at risk. So whilst these are concerning figures, I think the public sentiment was always going to suggest that this was a shorter term issue rather than a longer term issue, as with the 2009 crash. So the question is what this really means for the recruitment sector. So for 2019 to 2021, the projections indicate that recruitment was going to continue to grow, so around 3 to 6%, whilst trying to navigate really the big issue at that time, which was the exit from the EU. That was really the topic. It was about the departure of a lot of people from the UK to the EU, and whether they were going to have visas to get people back in to do some of the jobs as well. So recruitment heavily relied on the importing of labour from outside of the UK, and that was a critical one as well. So it's true that we're now in a very different position, but the key is that the businesses that adapt and survive things like this are the ones that will take a strong position when we come out, as we come now out of the pandemic, and that has had a lasting effect on recruitment. Okay, so that was the kind of the initial impact. In terms of how the companies adapted, we surveyed a number of sort of HR professionals in our network to see how they would basically be managing their workforce, as well as what their hiring plans were in the immediate future, and taking into consideration things like government support. And when it came to the recruitment side, more than half said that they were basically going to freeze all recruitment. So they were going to stop recruiting. A quarter of them said that they would basically continue to hire, but very less than the normal levels. And that 1 in 7, so around 14–15%, said that they would continue to hire as normal. Only 5% said that they would be basically upping their recruitment, and that's typically the 5% that sat in those headline markets. So that's life sciences, that's medical, and so on and so on. They're the ones that basically then sort of obviously saw the boost from this. The digital economy saw a boost from this. So as much as retail was going down, if you were a Boohoo or an online retailer, then those guys actually saw a big boost, because a lot of people were moving to online, and therefore they needed drivers, they needed warehouse staff, and so on and so on. So 4% only really saw a benefit out of the back of this one. So it's clearly had a substantial impact on recruitment. The lockdown and isolation policies meant that many businesses were forced to either shut or downsize. And there's been obviously layoffs and a significant reduction in the workforce across many of those industries. Recruitment agencies themselves were obviously strongly impacted, particularly those that target the most affected industries, because the agencies are costly. They typically charge a fee. And therefore, a lot of people were trying to downsize on everything they were doing. So even if they were reducing their recruitment, they certainly didn't want to pay agencies for it. So they tried to move more to technology like job boards and so on to do their recruitment processing in-house rather than using agencies. So the recruiting agencies did take a pretty big hit. We've got a number of clients who work in the hospitality industry, who were, basically providing staff for many of the big events across London and the Southeast. And they literally dropped to near 7% of what they were doing the year before. So a massive, massive drop. Have a massive office in Covent Garden. So for them, this was a huge one. Margins are tight in that industry as well. So it's not like they're cash rich. So this was a huge impact for a lot of the agencies. For those industries who were still recruiting, however, the social distancing rules obviously present their own challenges. Much of it to do with having to do stuff virtually rather than face to face. So, and with the virus, obviously there's likely to be fewer candidates around, and there's obviously the pressures on trying to recruit for those urgent sectors. So you've got less candidates, less people. You can't do face to face, and some industries that are obviously ramping up to deal with things that you've got to try and get on the back of, as well as all that business that is dropping off. So it was a huge challenge for them. The biggest gainers were, unsurprisingly, medical, government, supermarkets, anything in sort of the food production and agricultural side, delivery, cleaning. Those sorts of businesses are the ones that really got a boost out of COVID. And obviously any business that was involved in promoting remote working and homeschooling. All of us suddenly got onto the back of Office 365, worked out how to get Teams working. Teams itself saw a huge demand on its service to the point where it really slowed down for a good 1 or 2 weeks, and that's a company like Microsoft. So I think everybody saw and lived that experience. Many companies use this time to reflect. So they use this time to reflect on their business, so how their staff had adapted and performed. A lot of our clients very much saw this as a way of finding out who their stars were, as well as stripping out any deadwood. So there was a lot of deadwooding that went on during this phase, where they really saw people working from home and actually contributing less, if not nothing, and some people contributing more. So taking them out of that office environment and move them into a more remote environment actually gave them time to reflect and understand actually who the key players were, and where they could actually strip redundant people out of the business. And we saw a lot of that. How they were obviously looking at how robust their processes were when people weren't next to each other. That was a big change for a lot of businesses, and what technology really they were missing to pull everything together collaboratively. It's easy when you're in the office to swap paper and talk to people and so on, but when you've got to try and manage that, whether it's dealing with cases, whether it's dealing with specific clients, whether it's pulling together information for a pitch to a business, it's very easy to work in an office environment, very difficult when you're remote and you haven't got the tools in place to help you do that. As a business ourselves, we saw demand go up. We had probably the best. March and April, it was dead. No one did anything. I think everybody was still riding on the whole thing that, Boris said to stay at home, so I'm going to stay at home. The weather was great in the UK for sure during those months, so everybody suddenly learned what gin was all about. Sit in the garden, put their feet up for a little while, and I think that was pretty much evident across the entire industry for those 2 months. But then from June onwards, really everybody sort of started to get back into the thread of it. We saw a fantastic growth and demand during the rest of that year, and in fact ever since. We put that down to the quiet time, the quiet time that people had to actually reflect on, to come out of the day-to-day and actually take a step back and look at their business and understand actually what processes do we need, what technology do we need, realizing that what they had was insufficient to support a business at the end of the day. And therefore we had an awful lot of interest in actually being a SaaS product that was obviously internet-based and very easy to deploy. Is that on the back of that, we got a lot. So we've been hiring more in the last 18 months than we have at any other time. So there have been benefits to this as much as anything else. The lasting effects. So recruiters working in sectors that are seeing increased demand, such as healthcare, pharma, life sciences, and things like that, are likely to have already made serious and rapid changes to the way they work, because in theory, they've had to live through that 18 months of high demand. And long term, obviously, we hope to see that these markets expand as the crisis highlights the underwhelming level of current investment, and the focus shifts to advancements in healthcare technology and obviously increasing staffing levels for the future. Those businesses that have been quick to embrace working from home have invested in technology and built solid, adaptable operational foundations will be in the best position really to come out of this and obviously leverage and grow. For other sectors, whilst pipelines have slowed to an agonizing stop in some places, the adaptability of these businesses should see them through these times. So the sad reality obviously is that at the end of the line for a lot of the businesses that are too slow to or too resistant to change, and brands that have failed to look after employees during the time of crisis. As we come out the other side of this one, there's a sense of community, I guess, and a more sort of a sense of a community, certainly with clients and candidates. And people will be looking for that in their new work. So those who do not embrace or did not embrace change will typically fall by the wayside. And we have seen ourselves, a number of clients, drop off where really they just weren't adopting technology in the way they needed to and were caught short. The long story short is really that we do need to brace ourselves. The nature of employment and the recruitment sector will have changed. And as that recovery continues, it will be a different world to the one we left behind, for sure. The furlough scheme, which incidentally ends today, would have had a significant impact on continuity. So the impact on a business's ability to retain their staff was absolutely clear, the clear objective of the furlough scheme, and that will help. And that will likely make it quicker and easier for companies to return to the previous levels of operation and productivity they had before. For some organizations and recruitment agencies, there will be a pressure to reassign and potentially reskill workers to parts of the business and sectors that are creating jobs in the short or longer term. So reskilling and diversification is a key strategy to try and retain, reskill staff. We'll also see an increase in the availability of flexibility and remote working options, and that is a key one we've seen. Hybrid working is up with furlough, one of those new words that now hits our vocabulary. That now has become a core offering. Okay, so we're seeing remote now as a location. We know obviously we help our clients to post jobs out to the various job boards and advertise them on their own websites. And in that field is always a location. And the two key deciders on putting candidates forward is their skill set and obviously their location to the office. That has changed massively in the last 18 months. And we're seeing the word remote as the location now on most jobs that go up on the job boards. And that's a huge step change in the way that clients have been looking at how they acquire what they require of their candidates. So looking at the recovery, so whilst almost a quarter of UK jobs are placed on furlough under the JRS scheme, it's worth noting that there have been a hive of recruitment activities happening elsewhere. So charter flights, for example, Eastern Europeans were bussed over on charter flights in order to plug farmers' gaps in farmers with fruit pickers and the like. Airline staff have been redeployed to be hospital staff, Tesco delivery drivers, and the like. So there has been some innovation, if you like, and flexibility in the way that people are dealing with the recovery. The Recruitment Employment Confederation reported the permanent vacancies fell at their sharpest rate in April 2020, unsurprisingly. So the RNE, they basically put in a report. They had the biggest fall in perm vacancies ever in that one period, that 1 month. But then as of last month, the number of employees going onto payroll, if you've read the news, in August, it was up 241,000, taking us now to 29.1 million people on payroll. Now that's higher than it was pre-pandemic. So only slightly, but it's higher than it was pre-pandemic. When you couple that with the news that the UK now has 1.1 million vacancies, then we can only assume from that some of those are new vacancies, they're new jobs, because we are now at pre-pandemic levels. It's only been 18 months. And with 1.1 million vacancies on, what we have now is a very vibrant and an active recruitment and employment market. The issues we're seeing, though, through our clients is an abundance of jobs, but no quality candidates. Okay, and that comes probably down to a number of things. We have European workers who left as a result of Brexit. I myself lost my highly proficient and fantastic cleaner who was from Portugal, and she went home as a result of Brexit. So I was absolutely gutted, and that I'm not the only one to have lost a key person, a key worker in back to Europe, and that was before Brexit. So that was as a result of them hearing things that they thought were going to be challenging and leaving and going back to their home countries. And they've not returned, and that's typically due to COVID restrictions. It could be due to the visa situation in terms of the qualification now that we must hit. We've got a point system now that you must qualify to come back in. So we have a shortfall of people in the European community in particular. The government believed, I think, that the British workers would fill that gap. But the reality is there are many jobs that the UK workers just do not want to do. And the European workers do. HGV drivers is a great example where we had an abundance of HGV drivers from the Eastern European bloc, and they've all basically gone back. And no intention of coming back anytime soon. So we have a shortage, and the UK workforce is not filling that gap. So that's one key symptom. Many of the biggest hit sectors, such as leisure and hospitality, as I touched on earlier, they've fallen victim to essentially a double whammy. So take a key profession like a head chef or something like that, the waiters, things like that. So they've all sought alternative careers. So they become labourers, they become plasterers, bricklayers. Their money is on par. Arguably, their hours are more sociable. They get to spend more time with their family, and it's more reliable and consistent work. And that's pretty key for anyone with a family. So what we're seeing is that the reluctance to return, if you like, to that role is fairly evident. And until these people see blue skies in the pandemic, so they actually see that we are definitely going to come out of a lockdown and we're not going to go back in. We still have the cloud of the potential winter lockdown over our heads at the moment. We don't really know what's going to happen with the combination of COVID, flu, and everything else going into the winter season. Many of them are reluctant to come back to their old jobs, so they are prioritizing regular wages over their passion. Okay, and that is a fundamental part of that, and we're seeing that hugely. There are highly skilled chefs dotted about doing something different because they get a regular wage. The furlough scheme, obviously, now, while it was pretty successful in preserving some of the jobs, it has resulted in many people sitting back on partial pay. I mean, that is unfortunately the way it is. And they are opting not to return to work at the moment because Rishi Sunak is paying their wage, or at least 80% of it or whatever. So they're basically sitting back and saying, well, I'll just take this time. So obviously from tomorrow, that changes, because the furlough scheme will end, and undoubtedly that will result now in either further layoffs where employers have kept people on the furlough scheme and just said, you know what, while the Chancellor's paying our wages, I'll keep you on, but at some time this has got to stop, and that is unfortunately likely to be tomorrow, and some of them will genuinely return to work. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a bit of a jump in unemployment over the coming weeks as a result of furlough ending. So what does that mean for the future of recruitment? So the fact is that recruiters will be playing a massive part in the post-COVID world. Okay, so, you know, unemployment rates are improving. The recruitment industry is therefore going to be pivotal in not only mobilizing the UK workforce again, but also in offering a serious hand in helping clients to adjust to the new nature of recruiting. From the adoption of new technologies such as video interviewing, virtual onboarding, they need to basically embrace flexible and remote workforces, and that's a big step change. Again, that's a culture change for a lot of these companies who are moving back into the agency world. And the biggest plays by far are going to be around virtualization of interviewing and onboarding. And by onboarding, what I mean is that as somebody joins an organization, or it could be a new tenant, forms have to be completed. right? There's and sometimes quite a lot of forms. We have normal registration type forms. We have GDPR. We might have DBS checks, depending on the nature of the work and so on. So there's a lot that goes on onboarding, and that's always traditionally been a very manual process that it's just always been done that way. And obviously we weren't able to do that. People needed to be able to interview people almost immediately following lockdown to try and keep the business going, but could not physically meet face to face with anyone else but their close family. Okay, so this was a huge force in terms of changing people's perceptions on actually how this stuff was going to work. Social distancing rules obviously therefore make it difficult to interview people. So HR departments operating remotely themselves, sitting at home, needing to coordinate their hiring programs without the benefits of actually being with somebody. I think Gartner said that it was 86% of businesses are now conducting virtual interviews during the pandemic. So certainly during the pandemic, and 85% have basically used now new technology for onboarding. So they're using virtual means now to actually collect information and speak to people. And that's a huge percentage when you consider it was very, very light beforehand. It was very much people meeting face to face, and that's how business was done. Many of those practices necessitated by COVID will likely stay for good. Due to the need now for remote working, many have strengthened their processes and centralized some of the aspects of their recruitment activities, such as the initial telephone calls, video screening, competency assessments. All of those things are pretty much now done online, rather than what they would have done before, which has had them in a classroom type environment. So there's a huge change there in terms of how recruitment will be morphed into a much more futuristic view. What we found is that, by forcing the companies to function differently, given the disparate and remote nature of their businesses, they've in turn been forced to innovate and rethink their processes and technology, and the way that they've improved. They've actually improved the quality of their work and the productivity of their work across their entire business by actually taking stock of actually how the business runs. So they were kind of forced into this sort of business process evaluation. And the net effect of that typically is that you get higher quality and a better process. So as a symptom, doing everything virtually creates an audit trail. By having Teams meetings like, Zoom meetings like this one, which can be recorded, by having using chat, sharing documents via OneDrive, doing everything through Outlook and so on, we've been able to actually now audit what we do. There's no casual conversations over the kettle in the kitchen or anything like that. It's auditable. So we're already driving now an element of data which is great for audit, but what it's also good at is looking at reflecting on that data and actually saying, can we improve the relationship that we have with our clients? Can we improve the relationship that I have with my candidates by actually reviewing this data? So it gives us something to view, and that in itself also drives long-term improvements. So how is technology helping? So companies like us. So in January 2020, at the time we started hearing about this thing called COVID that was some place called Wuhan that nobody had ever heard of, unless you bought a Dell computer, because they all came from Wuhan, and wondered if it was really ever going to affect us. We released our own built-in video interviewing technology as part of our platform. Now, this was no foresight on my part. I had no idea that the pandemic was going to happen. And frankly, the first 3 months of trying to sell in video interviewing to our client base was tough. It was seen as a very much a nice to have feature. Consultants or recruiters were, they'd get a brief from their client, they'd go and see that client, understand the need, they would be meeting face to face with everybody. So this was very much seen as a nice to have and slightly impersonal. Most recruiters were therefore, and clients were therefore not particularly enamored with the whole concept of video interviewing. They very much wanted to see the whites of their eyes, right? So, the idea of one-way interviewing is basically where you can relay a set of questions to somebody and they will record their answers to those and then they send those back in their own time. And two-way obviously is a session like this where you've got people interacting in real time. So the idea of doing that virtually with somebody on a screen wasn't really seen as being the way that the business was, or the industry was really moving, too impersonal. And yet here we are. So within, I don't know, a week of lockdown, we're all now very much au fait with Teams and Zoom. We've all now got, where did you get that background? And I think you're on mute, very much embedded in our vocabulary. So, that was again a step change, but everybody they got it straight away. They moved to that straight away. They understood it. Took a little while to get, to make sure that the cat wasn't jumping around on the shelves behind you and everything else. But by and large, everybody actually adopted that technology and got on with it. It's now become entrenched really in what we do. I don't know anybody really that in industry that doesn't have a Zoom call or a Teams call with one of their colleagues or one of their clients on any given day. We live and die by Teams now. So at the time that we went into lockdown, we decided, hey, why don't we just give all our clients video interviewing for free? Because that could be our contribution, if you like, to the greater good. So we gave all our clients access to video interviewing for free, and they could have that we started off at 6 months, but it soon grew to becoming the length of the pandemic. And that really got people into, how this could work. I'm really forced to do this now. So I've got to keep the wheels turning, even though it might be short term. This is a good tool. So video and electronic onboarding has now become probably one of the most critical tools in a recruiter's toolbox. So so much so that what we did in the last release was to release more video functionality. So video emails and video CVs. So this is where the candidates can actually record not just interview questions, but they can actually express, their interests and so on, and actually have themselves a video CV as well as the paper-based version. And our clients appreciate that as well, because not only do they, we've all received CVs, and then they come into the room and you're like, that's not what I was expecting at all. So sometimes, it's good to get a much more sort of rounded view of somebody and how they come across by seeing not only the paper-based version of their CV, but actually the whites of their eyes and how they come across and how they articulate themselves and so on. So video has become very, very key in that area. Video emails is basically where instead of typing an email to somebody, you record a 15-second or a 30-second snippet. Again, it's now seen as a lot more personal than an email, because actually you're addressing that person directly. You're embedding that picture into the email, and they're able to play that and then you're able to get back to them. So that has become now entrenched in typical business, which is people want to be able to now engage using video technology. So we've seen a huge change in that. So I'll take you through, a typical example, if you like, of a recruiting process and how really this comes into play. So a recruiter will normally receive a brief for a job from their client. What they will often do then is visit that client. So they will leave the office, they will go to the client, they will have a conversation, go through the job spec, and make sure they understand the needs, what the sort of candidates they're seeking, and so on. And then they'll come back to the office. They'll post that job out onto the job board. So that might be Indeed, LinkedIn, Monster, Reed, and so on. And they will look for people to apply for those jobs. They would then typically scan, say, their tracker database. So they will have all their thousands of candidates. They will have all of that information in Tracker, and then they will use that to also search job boards. So the likes of Indeed, CV Library, and so on. They all have CVs as well as jobs. So we can search those CVs as well. So they pull all of these candidates back in, and then we rank them. So we say these are the best ones based on what they do, the nature of the job, and so on and so on. So we match these people up and we rank them. So let's say that they shortlist 10 candidates for that particular job. So that's 10 meetings that they've got to arrange. And if that's in person, that's 5 to 10 hours of that consultant's time. That's 10 cups of tea, probably 20 hobnobs, and that's a day gone easily, okay? If they then decide that 5 of those they want to put forward to the client, then that's 5 meetings they have to arrange between the client and the candidate. That's more hobnobs, and so on and so on. So you can see that this is a very consuming process. So this was, days of meetings to organize and conduct, and it was just the way things were done before. That was just the way that the recruiting industry worked. So as harsh as it sounds, most recruiters, most clients, anyone who interviews people will typically have an idea of whether or not that person has either a cultural or a professional fit, probably within a few seconds or a few minutes of talking to that person. It's just what they do. So With video, candidates basically can have the option to pre-record their interview questions, and they can do that in their own time using any PC or smartphone, and then they could submit those back to the recruiter. So unlike face-to-face meetings, if they record these, they can be played back at any time, but they can also be shared with other people. So that may be other people in the company. It may be that they share that directly with the client, but they can review it over and over again and actually get different opinions from different people about actually how that person articulated themselves with that particular question. So again, it's a very, very useful, but a key change. The recruiters can then organize Teams or Zoom calls as a follow-up. So if they wanted to do a face-to-face, they could do that as a follow-up using something like Teams. So already it's highly efficient. When that hire is then made, so let's say that they pick one of those candidates and that hire is then made, they need to be onboarded. And that's normally compliance checks. It's filling out various forms, it's training, and so on and so on. So in supporting agencies and companies alike, we've now released web forms. And web forms is basically the ability for people to go online, fill in information, upload documents. It does e-signatures, so they sign using their finger or mouse. We capture all that information, and then we pull that information directly back into our system, so we can automate everything that they're doing. We now have packs, so we can actually say, right, they need to fill in the following 4 forms because they are of type A, or it's 3 forms if they are of type B, and we can send those packs out. So it becomes a very, very slick, automated way of collecting information that is normally done in the old-fashioned way, would have been done by the recruiter at their desk using Post-it notes and God knows what to try and I challenge anybody on this call to tell me they don't use Post-it notes for something in their world. So with technology like Tracker, we provide basically the clients with all the core CRM functionality they come to expect of any kind of system, but all the tools they need to actually adopt this new way of working. And that's really where our focus has been. And the pandemic has kind of crystallized that for us, which is that this could happen at any time and people need to be able to work like that. But also we've broken the mold. People are now not all working in the same location all the time. They are working remotely, and therefore they need to do that in the most effective way. And we're probably not going to change that mentality now. So we need to embrace it rather than challenge it. So recruitment always was and will continue to be about people, and we certainly aren't diluting the need for face-to-face interactions with colleagues or between clients and candidates. We know that that's important. You know, recruitment is very much a people-based sector, but for sure there is now an appreciation for how actually technology can improve the quality and the productivity of the recruitment process, even if it's in part. Okay, so I'll leave you with an anecdote of our own. So we recently needed to hire a new head of UK client success. Our client success managers are the ones that support and work with our clients and try and make sure that they're adopting the tool in the right way, using the technology in the best way. So we use Tracker internally ourselves. So it's a CRM at heart, and we use that to run our entire business. Okay, so we decided to put our own software to the test and do the hire using Tracker for our new head of UK client success. So we advertised the job on a number of job boards and social media channels using Tracker, and in came a wash of candidates. Their CVs obviously are automatically pulled in. They're analyzed. We analyze their job history, their skill set, their location, personal attributes, and everything else, and we rank them. Okay, so we can exclude the candidates that are clearly either not skilled or typically on the other side of the world, because whatever ad you put out, you're always going to get a thousand candidates coming in from the other side of the world who just want to move here for the sake of it. We decided then to send out our initial screening interview questions directly from Tracker with 5 simple questions that the candidate can record in their own time about themselves, their experience, the suitability, and the value that they bring to the role. So very simple, punchy questions. Each one I think they had a minute and a half total on each question to really get that across. They could re-record it if they needed to, but to get that point across. 50% of the candidates that we actually sent those requests out to never even responded. So we see that a lot. You know, there's a lot of people who sort of fire and forget. They just chuck their CV against every job and they see what sticks. Okay, so for us, that was already time saved in arranging meetings that likely no one was ever going to turn up to. So we managed to whittle that out without even doing anything. Of the remaining half, we were able to basically narrow that down to 5 candidates and arrange two-way video interviews at various times of the day. No travel is required. So, you know, we didn't need them to come in, just 30, 45 minutes of focused discussion. Okay. So, and because it was all done remotely, we were able to actually consider candidates from further afield, which we may not have done if we hadn't been in lockdown. We would have considered people in the local area. So we've gone further afield. The follow-up calls continued, and basically the final appointment was the final candidate was then appointed. Matt lives 2.5 hours away. He's down in the other end of Brighton, Worthing, I think he's in Worthing. But we used basically Teams we basically decided that his role was not required to be here all the time. We had Teams, and therefore this could be a remote work. He was offered the role, signed his contract, did all of that online, completed all his onboarding, payroll, registration, did all his training online. So without any face-to-face meetings, Matt was hired. He's basically one of the best hires I think we've ever made. And now out of lockdown, you'll often see Matt wandering around the office. In fact, he's in tomorrow. As an ex-recruiter, Matt was also sold on the process that we had adopted. He loved the fact that, you know, we could engage him as a job seeker stuck at home, looking for work, knowing that he couldn't actually go out and about and actually seek his own job. And that was really where the buy-in came in. So he was on board from the get-go. We've since repeated this process now twice. So Cam and Harrison, who joins us on the 1st of November, hence Sam, we're talking about Office Space. All of these have now been hired 100% virtually. Okay, so it's testament, if you like, to the fact that this is a working process, and this is the way that recruitment is likely to be in part going forward. Okay, so in summary, COVID has changed recruitment, and possibly forever, some for the good and some not. But if it wasn't for technology in general, I think most businesses would have come out in a pretty poor state from the pandemic. The focus, therefore, really is around the innovation, the focus, if you like, on innovation and experience, and how businesses needed to change had opened companies' eyes to really what was achievable with technology. And much of this is definitely going to stick around. Any questions?
Thank you, Andy. That was really, really interesting. I've got loads of questions, but we've only got 10 or 15 minutes. So I don't know if we want to go back to seeing us all again and not having the presentation, Andy, I'm not sure. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? If you want to unmute yourselves and either put something down in chat so I know you want to ask a question. Laura has a hand up.
Hi, Sam. Thank you. Just checking I'm off mute. Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. The question that came up for me during it, but I think you have answered it primarily. So when we're interviewing over Zoom and things like that, particularly for client-facing roles, how successful? I mean, I know employees has actually been very successful, even though, you know, we didn't meet before he started working with you. Have you found that other companies have had the same kind of outcome in terms of, I'm thinking about cultural fit and whether or not that they're coming across accurately when it's being interviewed, you know, online, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it's kind of opened up the next, for us, what is the next wave, if you like, and that is that it's great to see a CV. It's great to see a CV and a video. It's great to have a two-way conversation with somebody, but if they are client-facing, and so certainly in sales, then they might be able to blag that with the best of them. So what we're looking at now, and we're working with a good friend of mine I used to go to school with, who some of you may know from The Apprentice, Lee McQueen, who won series 4, I think, of The Apprentice. He is working basically around competencies. Okay, so the next wave, I think, is going to be about, as much as you can have a conversation with somebody, and whether it's in a room and whether it's on Teams, it's hard to know whether you would really pick up the subtleties in their, you know, their proficiency. But really, when they do a competency test, it's very difficult for them to hide what's under the hood. Okay, so, you know, what we're looking at next is really around the competency frameworks, and that may be industry specific. So it could be sales, manufacturing, whatever that be. You know, some people are very cognitive and lend themselves well to finance, and some people want to sell secondhand cars, and obviously cognitive is not the way to go. So it's more about understanding how extrovert are they, how introvert are they, how task driven are they, and so on. And the competency frameworks is really where I see that playing out, which is I can give you a video, I can give you a CV, but I can actually also give you a personality test and a competency test to where is a time pressured exercise to really try and unearth what they truly think and how that cultural fit fits in. And it is more about that cultural side. So that, I think, is going to be the next real wave, which is if I want a really truly 360-degree view of somebody, I need to be able to look under the hood as well as at their face.
And I suppose it's the probation period as well, isn't it? That it's going to be so important if you're not meeting somebody, because that's your opportunity to, I guess, try it out and then make changes. Yeah, and you know, as I was saying earlier on, the other thing is because people are working more remotely, there's more auditability. You know, you could have somebody sitting at a desk, but they could be sitting on Facebook all day, right, watching YouTube, and you wouldn't have a Scooby. So I think it's more about and that's Dawn. That was my Cockney rhyming slang coming straight in there. It's more about that auditability, which says, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? And obviously remote working has given us that kind of that insight, you know, so anybody who's working on Teams or even has Teams in there installed on their machine, it's very easy for admin to go in and see actually what activity they've been doing on a daily basis, number of calls, number of meetings, amount of time online. That's the sort of stuff that I think, you know, kind of alleviates some of that probationary stuff. Again, another sort of positive symptom. Great, thank you.
Andy, we've got a few comments and questions down in the chat. I'll just read them out. Annette Holdsworth says, we at Wiltshire Council Employment and Skills are trying, this maybe just comments, are trying to support a number of businesses that are struggling to recruit by link them with employment programs and our neat young people. I don't know if I'm not sure if you wanted this, if it's a comment or if they want to make and expand any further comment on that.
Yeah, hi Sam, it's Annette, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, just really that I work for Wiltshire Council in Employment and Skills, and we are finding quite a few employers in the county are struggling to recruit, particularly our larger based employers, our manufacturing and production.
Yeah.
So what we are doing is we're linking with those employers to try and get them to look outside of their traditional recruiting techniques and methods, and to maybe look at the hidden workforce. So those people that may not have been working prior to the pandemic, but may have actually been doing some education during the time and some upskilling, some confidence building, and trying to link them together to sort of plug those gaps that have been left by Brexit and COVID, from losing huge swathes of the, would I say, entry-level roles and stuff from the traditional roles. So we are linking quite closely with them, but I was very interested in your whole sort of video CV type thing as well.
Yeah. How are you using Facebook at all?
Yes, well, we use Instagram quite a lot. We use Twitter quite a lot. We do have Facebook page, but we don't tend to get huge amounts of engagement with that from the cohorts that we work with.
Right.
You know, our young people who don't ever seem to be off their phones, don't ever seem to actually answer their phones. I'm not sure what they're for, to be honest. You know, they've stuck to their hands, but you try and call them, you can never get hold of them. So, you know, that's something. But we also send out regular bulletins of jobs as well to the cohorts that we work with. So we're sort of working with local businesses to say, look, we can advertise your jobs, we can do it for free through our social media pages and stuff like that. But I was really interested in the whole video CV thing, and that might be something that I speak to other employers about.
It's quite good. In fact, I'm working with one of my clients is in Devises Melksham, and they are they're really pushing that side now, which is to try and get people to do their own profiles so that they can be pushed out. But you know what we're finding a lot now, it's certainly around that social media side, Facebook, where you're trying to tap into a market that typically is not in a professional place right now. So typically will not have the time or the inclination or even the knowledge necessary to build a CV. Won't be on the job boards, might be looking, you know, but it's no further than the pin board in Morrison's. They're on Facebook. And what we're finding is that in the sort of the light industrial, blue collar, in, you know, manufacturing type areas, is that, you know, one of my clients in Wrexham is filling nearly half his jobs on Facebook alone.
Yeah.
Because he's tapping into the right groups. And he's finding those people that typically would not be on the radar normally. So wouldn't be on a job board, won't be on LinkedIn, and so on. And really, and you know, being able to apply with Facebook obviously just takes all that sting out of it. So you might find that it's a good way to try and outreach to those markets, though, like you say, the hidden workers, using something like Facebook.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you, Laura. Moving down the chat here, I've got Lynette asks, what are the tips that you wanted to share with us in attracting clients, especially in this pandemic?
In attracting clients?
This is what it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So basically you have two main threads, obviously, to a recruiting market. One is clients, and the other one is candidates. So, you know, within the tools that we have now something we call automation, marketing automation, which you guys will probably have been victim to at some point, which is those emails that sort of seem to just trickle in every single week until you tell them to go away and then they leave you alone. So that's marketing automation, which is basically I'm going to keep pestering you until I get a reaction. That's essentially what it is. It's also useful for things like business development. And that comes into play when you've got, you know, a directory of people in the local area, or certain companies that work with certain things that you recruit for, and trying to keep them warm and fuzzy so that your agency is the one that is at the front of mind when it comes to recruiting. So constantly pushing out, you know, these are our top 3 candidates at the moment, and making sure that it's just about brand awareness. So you want to expose the brand without being annoying. Okay, so that's from a business development point of view. But we also have tools that kind of take that one step further, which is if you've got a really good CV, somebody walks in and they've got a really good CV, I really need a job. We can basically chew that CV and then we can actually search for jobs. So not only can we search for candidates, but we also have the tools that say what jobs are out there. Now there's something like 18 million jobs on that database across North America and Europe. I mean, it's a massive database, but it also tells us things like, you know, I don't want agency jobs. I just want the ones with direct employers. You know, it's great for, you know, local stuff. Annette will know, like Herman Miller and stuff like that, where you've actually got Backfor or one of these, where you have manufacturing and they need people, is that you can actually search their job boards, their own websites for their jobs. So the biggest tips are really around things like using marketing automation intelligently to either keep people warm and fuzzy, or to actually try and generate new business, or use tools that do allow you to actually go and search for the jobs that are out there. And typically, you know, reverse engineer a CV, or actually just say, do an open search. I want all, you know, administrative, you know, executives working in insurance within 50 miles of me, because I've got loads of great candidates that could fill those roles. Go and show me all those roles and pull those in and actually try and reach out to those clients directly with the candidates you have and get traction that way. So I think the biggest tip is always, you know, just never sit back and wait and assume this is going to happen. Always keep pumping the top of the funnel with active job searching, and then obviously the bottom of the funnel with good candidates, and then the tool should match the two in the middle.
Thank you, and thank you, Lynette, for your question. The next one, have we got? Yeah, we've still got a bit of time. Belinda Westwood, what in your experience are recruiters looking for when they watch the candidate videos?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Sorry, Sam, and then there was another message, and then I slow typo. The reason why I'm asking the question, because I've got another comment which you'll get in a minute, is that I've heard some comments that there's scope for discrimination for video CVs, because as human beings we have unconscious bias and we kind of judge before we even know we're judging. So the way someone looks, or the way someone talks, or the way someone, you know, comes across on the video could actually mask some talent. I don't know what your experience.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it's horses for courses. I mean, if it is a client-facing role, you probably think, well, you know, if you can't sit in front of a camera, what are you going to be like in front of a client, right? So I think it's definitely, we have three main modes. One is, you know, it's a paper-based CV. The second mode is that it's audio only, and the third mode that it's full video. Now, you know, certainly in the US, there is a huge deal around the compliance, the auditability, and the compliance of actually why you reject candidates, as well as why you hire them. So they cannot be seen to be doing this based on, you know, how they personally come across, you know, their color, their religion, whatever that be. So we have to concede to the fact that the video could also be audio, and a lot of them are audio only. So they want to get their point across. Whether the consultancy, the agency marks them down on the basis that they're not prepared to either do audio or video, I guess is down to the agency, but also the type of role. You know, we'll often find that, you know, if you want to hire some guy to go into a new housing estate and put plaster on the walls of 15 houses, do you care what they look like? So I think it will just come down to, you know, we give everybody the tools to say you can go from literally CV only through to full video, and it's up to you what you take out of that based on the role that you're searching for people for. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you have another question? Did you say you had two?
No, those were two linked with.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, no, I was going down to the next one, and I was wondering that actually, because well, I don't know if, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the questions at the same time, but something that occurred to me when Andy was talking about doing the video interviews and all that sort of thing, so it really moves away from people sending their CVs in and almost being, you know, like avoiding putting their date of birth, or maybe not putting a photo on because they don't want to be not included because of what they look like, or
Yeah.
the other way around. And it's almost like that's completely changed now. It's all about that's okay.
There's two steps to that, because there's the process of getting candidates into the agency to actually then consider, and then there's the process of putting them forward to the client. Now, we often find that when we present candidates to the client, we will create, and certainly a lot of industries are creating completely anonymous CVs. So they won't have any personal details on there. They won't have their name on there. They won't have their location on there. They'll have a reference number on there. Then they will have a summary of key, you know, so they've taken the personality out of the CV and just put in the raw facts. This is my employment history. These are my key skills. This is my education history. I am reference 1156. And it literally then comes down to that, certainly as a first pass, which means that there can be no room really for discrimination. So we because we strip everything out of these CVs, we're actually able to put only the pieces back that are relevant. So that's quite a key one. And the client, often they'll have a portal where they'll go on and they'll see the profile that we've created for them, and that's completely anonymous. But again, some people, if you're hiring at a certain level for a certain role, they will expect to see everything. You know, they literally want to see your tattoos.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else, most people are on mute, does anybody else have any questions they might want to put down in chat or come off mute and ask? Well, I might just ask then, Andy. I mean, it was really interesting. One of the things I was going to ask is, you know, how have you had to change in terms of the pandemic? But you explained all that, so that was really interesting to hear about what you did and the new things you started to integrate into Tracker. Do you think that you see the job of the recruiter becoming redundant as technology plays a bigger part in the process?
Yes and no. I mean, I think most companies will want to find productivity, and certainly, you know, where revenues are down, they will want to have a more productive team. It also comes down to the competitive edge. So, you know, the clients who you say, well, I'm dealing with 2 agencies. One guy, you know, sends his CVs by email. I've got these massive CVs. They're not formatted. So they're all, you know, they're all over the place. I've got to try and root through all of the information. And yet this other agency is now just giving me a log on. I can go on and see all my jobs. I can see exactly where they are in the process. I can click on them. I see a lovely highlighted profile. I can star rate them, request an interview there and then, specify actually what days I'm free to interview them. And I can do all of that. You're creating, if you like, an engagement, a journey, if you like, with your client that is better than before. And I think there is a lot of that. So some people are using tools for competitive edge. Some people are using it purely for productivity because they're like, well, if I can remove a head, then I'm going to save money, right? So I do see that it's going to shift, because as technology becomes more prevalent, people will want to use those tools more, and you'll need the people with the right skills to do that within your agency. But on the, you know, we want to get rid of those dead tasks that just are so manual and so laborious and just take time. And it's they're the ones that really everyone wants us to remove. They want to be, you know, I've got a job, I need to find the candidates quickly, because it's certainly, if I'm competing against another agency, I need to be the one that gets in there first with the right CV. So tools in that respect are trying to really compress the recruitment process.
And where do you think then the next big change in technology might come in the recruitment sector?
Automation. So AI, whatever we decide we want to call AI, it's really about trying to understand if there are, the way a consultant looks at a CV, or even 2 consultants look at the same CV can be very different. And we're looking for certain keywords, phrases, the way subconsciously we're seeing the way they've structured it, you know, the way they're using bullet points, clear headings. Does the font change? You know, the attention to detail. You can extract a lot from that. Those are the sorts of things that we've got to try and reenact in some way if we're going to try and provide people with, to say, look, here are the 10 best candidates. And I've kind of done all the hard thinking for you. Here are the 10 best candidates. So you focus your energy on really those, because, you know, the list came back with 200. We've got it down to 10. That's a very accurate 10, so that you're focusing their mind on really the bits that they're very good at, which is the interaction with the person and the nitty gritty details that computers, you know, they don't necessarily see because it's zeros and ones. So AI I think is the next big part, and it's not just in analyzing the stuff that is coming in, it's actually analyzing the stuff that has been done, and are there ways that we can actually further improve those journeys? You know, is there time that we can save by doing certain things? Are there people in my team who are struggling because actually I'm looking at their pattern and I'm looking at somebody else's pattern, and I can see actually why they're not achieving, because their pattern is looking different. Okay, so AI is a great tool for actually trying to speed up the process of stuff coming in, but it's also actually a great way of being able to reflect on how the team is performing and how we can improve there as well. So I think that's probably what people want now. They want good quality analytics in a simple form coming out that tells them actually, how do I run my business better?
Okay, great. So, and sorry, could you just remind what did AI completely stand for?
Artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence, right? Okay. Okay. Well, lovely. That's really, really great. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. And if not, well, thank you to the people who are still here. Thank you to Andy for your talk. And oh, got another message. Oh, thank you. Really interesting. Yeah, thank you so